What if the best pilot in the world was never allowed to fly? Meet Elena Cortez, a grease-stained mechanic turned underground legend who taught herself to fly without ever leaving the ground. When real pilots start calling out for Ghosthawk in life-or-death moments, the military scrambles to find the woman behind the myth. Welcome to my channel. They used to call me the hangar ghost. You know, the kid always lingering in the background, clutching a torque wrench like it was a baton in a race I never got to run. Every day after high school, I'd bike 3 miles through the Phoenix heat to get to Chandler Field, where my uncle worked maintenance for the Air National Guard. I wasn't allowed anywhere near the aircraft officially, but somehow I always found myself in the shadows, watching, listening, learning. By the time I turned 24, I had grease in my veins and a resume full of temp contracts, none of which put me anywhere near a flight stick. But still, I stayed close to the machines. I'm Elena Cortez, and for most of my 20s, I was the girl who could diagnose an avionics fault before the pilot even noticed it. I knew F-35s like they were old friends with moody personalities, each one talking through turbine pitch and fuel pressure deviations. But while others flew, I fixed. While others briefed in flight suits, I scribbled notes on my overalls with an oil pencil. Every application I ever sent to flight school came back with the same soulless line, "Regret to inform you." Once it was medical, something about a minor heart murmur that never showed up again. Another time they cited insufficient experience, despite my 1,000 hours logged in simulators. But the real reason? You learn to read between the lines. Too small, too brown, too loud in the wrong places and too quiet in the ones that matter. I didn't have the pedigree, or the patience to wait for someone to hand me permission. But I didn't stop. My days were spent under wing flaps and engine cowls. My nights? That's when I came alive. Inside my cramped apartment, just downwind of Sky Harbor's runway, I became Ghosthawk. That's the call sign I flew under in the online combat flight sim circuit. Not many folks knew who I was. Some figured I was ex-military. Others thought I was just some MIT prodigy messing around. But everyone learned one thing real fast. You don't bet against Ghosthawk in the skies. Pilots from across the globe, real ones, would join just to test me. F-16 tacticians from the IDF, Navy lieutenants from Pensacola, a few French Mirage jockeys. Didn't matter. I'd fly circles around them, pull maneuvers they'd never dare try outside the digital clouds, and leave them speechless in my wake. I wasn't flying with a joystick. I was flying with a blueprint in my head of how machines think. And when machines start misbehaving in real life, guess who they called? Elena, F-35 on pad 3's throwing a ghost error again. Elena, you've seen this fuel system bypass before? They trusted me to fix their wings, but never to wear them. Still, I watched. I listened. I built a library of every flight transcript, weather anomaly, emergency procedure I could get my hands on. And I flew every one of them digitally, at night, alone. That's how I found the pattern. It was during a drill Operation Solstice. The 161st Refueling Wing was running cross-state simulations with new pilots from Davis-Monthan. One of the scenarios involved ECM interference and instrument blackout during desert storm conditions. A pilot named Captain Vega flamed out on simulated approach. Every fix they tried failed. Except one. Mine. I built that exact scenario months ago in my sim rig. I'd run it every way imaginable until I found a backdoor solution, a descending turn using natural terrain currents and predictive wind shear modeling. I'd posted the maneuver anonymously to a small aviation tactics forum. It got some attention. Nothing major. But I heard Vega reference it. Word for word. Trying the Ghosthawk turn someone posted last month. He landed clean. No one knew who Ghosthawk was. That was fine by me. Until the day a real jet in real trouble would call out to a ghost on the ground. And that day wasn't far off. The morning of the 18th started quiet. I was halfway through replacing a hydraulic line on a KC-135 when I felt the buzz of my phone deep in my coveralls. Private number. No voicemail. I didn't think much of it. Just another recruiter ghosting me back. Again. The Arizona sun was already baking the tarmac at Goldwater Field, and the Mirage fighters from the French exchange squad were practicing tight turns over the eastern range. I took a second to shield my eyes and watch one of them roll out of a high-G turn and punch through a dust layer like it was tissue paper. One of the new guys, Tech Sergeant Ray King, nudged me. "You ever wish you were up there instead of down here with us mortals?" I gave him a look. He laughed. "Yeah, dumb question. I see how you stare at those birds. Like they owe you something." "They do." I muttered. not loud enough for him to hear. That afternoon, I ducked out early. The line chief didn't question it, said something about comp hours, and waved me off. Truth was, I just needed time. Time with my rig. The sim setup I'd built in my apartment wasn't flashy, but it was fierce. Dual throttle quadrant, full rudder pedal setup, curved triple screen display, and a custom seat I welded from an old Jeep chassis. If you sat in it long enough, you didn't feel like you were playing a game. You felt like the air wrapped itself around you. I booted up the weather simulation first. Desert crosswinds out of the southeast, thermal updrafts around the high ridges, sporadic dust storms sweeping in from Sonora. Classic late summer chaos. I ran a few scenarios, mostly low visibility approaches and reaction drills for new pilots. I didn't do it for fun. I did it because I knew how unfun it became when those drills turned into real problems. That's when I caught the first anomaly. A ping, barely audible, through a half-dead radio band buried in the sim's signal integration layer. Most sim pilots never touched that setting. I did. It helped me model real-time military comm traffic. What came through wasn't clear, but I recognized a tail call. 7 Alpha Hotel. That wasn't just a number. It belonged to Major Noah Reeves, call sign Pinto, a legend out of Nellis, currently stationed at Goldwater for training exchange. He was testing new inertial NAV software on a solo run over Yuma Sector Bravo. And from what I could piece together, something had gone sideways. I kept listening. The signal was scrambled, garbled, but fragments broke through. Navigation fault, backup cycling, terrain mapping not updating, request, Hawk. That last part? My blood went cold. He didn't say Ghosthawk. He asked for Ghosthawk. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of my rig until dawn, replaying the broken signal, analyzing it frame by frame. Whatever Major Reeves ran into out there, it had fried every layer of his aircraft's system guidance. And I knew that region. Sector Bravo was a patchwork of low canyons, sudden updrafts, and outdated topographic data. No one flew it without automated support. No one except me. I'd mapped every inch of it in my sim, right down to the shadow lines at different times of day. I knew which canyons faked you out with mirrored ridges and which crosswinds would chew your tail off if you didn't slip correctly through them. I submitted a report, anonymous, again, to the base simulation group with full details on a workaround approach I dubbed the Ghosthawk loop. It was based on sonar-mapped terrain, taking advantage of 2 blind radar valleys to hook around a cluster of bluffs and bleed off altitude safely. I knew they wouldn't respond. But the next day, I saw Reeves land at Goldwater. Alive. The moment I saw his bird touch down, I exhaled. Hard. He climbed out of his F-35, clearly shaken. His walk wasn't his usual swagger. It was tight, contained, like someone who'd just stepped off a cliff and landed on a trampoline. That night, on the Sim forum, someone posted in the restricted ops thread. To the one who drew the map when no one else could, thank you. You saved a ghost in the dark. No signature, but the username was Pinto7. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because something was changing, and I could feel it in my bones. 3 days after Pinto's emergency, I got pulled into a meeting I wasn't supposed to be in. They called it an all-hands review, but it was really just brass from Davis Monthan and Goldwater posturing in front of one another. Most of the maintenance crew wasn't even invited. I got in because Chief Sanders asked for someone who knew the new F-35 avionics firmware well enough to explain a data dump nobody could read. That someone was me. I stood off to the side of the room in my dirt-smeared coveralls, while officers in flight suits and crisp uniforms talked in clipped sentences about the Reeves incident. Nobody mentioned how he found his way out of a dead zone with no terrain mapping, no GPS, and no flight control support. Nobody except the base commander. Colonel Jacoby, gruff guy with gray hair and desert squint lines, tapped a screen. A topographic map came up, with a bizarre, looping flight path traced over the canyon like a spilled string of spaghetti. This, he said, tapping again, is what Reeves flew out of that canyon. A pause. This wasn't in any protocol. Wasn't in any training sim. But it worked. Someone near the back muttered, "That's the Ghosthawk pattern." My ears perked up. Jacoby frowned. "What did you say?" The captain cleared his throat. I read about something like it on one of the sim boards. Last year, maybe. Posted under a username, Ghosthawk. No one knew who they were. Jacoby narrowed his eyes. Find out. My heart skipped a beat. I kept my face still, but my fingers curled tighter around the datasheet in my hand. It wasn't fear. Not really. It was the realization that I had maybe a day, maybe less, before someone connected the dots. And I didn't know yet if that would be a good thing, or a career-ending one. When the meeting ended, Jacoby brushed past me. Didn't look my way, but his aide did. A woman named Lieutenant Herrera. She paused, looked me over, then said with a kind of quiet calculation, "That sim pattern, Ghosthawk. You familiar with it?" I hesitated. "Yeah," I said. "I've flown it." "Real time?" "No. Sim." I glanced at her. "I built it." She held my gaze for a beat too long. Then she nodded once. "Thank you for your time, Cortez." That was it. No more questions. No reprimand. But that night, when I logged into the sim forums, the Ghosthawk account had a private message waiting. From Iron 6. Subject, requesting contact. "I believe I owe you a drink. Or at least a proper debrief. Pinto 7. The next day, I was back under the wing of a grounded trainer jet when I heard the familiar womp-womp of rotor blades coming in low. Blackhawk. Unmarked. Which was never a good sign. We all stopped what we were doing. Even Chief Sanders, who could ignore a 4-alarm fire if it didn't involve paperwork, stood up and squinted into the heat shimmer. 3 people stepped out. 2 were dressed like federal agents. The third? A pilot in a faded flight suit. No rank. No name tag. Just a patch, gray wings, and a white slash through a black field. Ghost Squadron. A unit I thought had been dissolved years ago. The lead agent walked straight toward the hangar. "We're looking for Elena Cortez." Every wrench in the place stopped moving. Ray King looked at me like I'd been moonlighting as a spy. I stood up slowly, hands wiping instinctively on my coveralls. "I'm Elena." The agent gave me a nod. "Ma'am, we'd like to ask you a few questions regarding simulation data and recent emergency protocols." "Am I in trouble?" The pilot behind them shook his head, stepping forward. "No," he said. "You're in demand." That evening, they took me to a secure facility out past Maricopa, nothing special from the outside. Just a sandblasted concrete shell with a helipad and some cranky floodlights. Inside? It was a different world. I walked past rooms full of data feeds, real-time satellite tracking, and rows of simulation pods 10 times more advanced than anything I had at home. They tapped into networks I thought were sealed to everyone short of the Pentagon. And in the middle of it all, sitting with his boots on a steel desk, was Major Noah Reeves. "Pinto, thought you might be taller," he said, grinning. "Thought you might be dead." I shot back. That made him laugh. He stood and offered a hand. "Whatever you are, Cortez, ghost, mechanic, flight whisperer, you saved my life." I looked around the room. "And now?" He gestured to a chair. "Now we want to know what else you know." They didn't say classified. They didn't say top secret. But everything in that briefing room screamed this never leaves the building. Major Reeves Pinto sat across from me with a steel tablet in his lap, flipping through projections like he was swiping away gravity. "What you built," he said, "wasn't just a sim pattern. It was predictive flight theory." I frowned. It was a hunch. I knew the terrain, ran the wind maps, matched it with known downdraft vectors. I got lucky. "No," he said, leveling a finger at me. "You got right. That maneuver? You predicted sensor drift, power cycle fault timings, and compensatory lift dynamics down to the second. That's not luck. That's legacy-grade flying." That was the first time I heard that phrase. Legacy grade. Turns out, that's what they call flight knowledge that was never written down, stuff passed from instructor to student, cockpit to cockpit, generation to generation. A way of flying that doesn't live in textbooks. It lives in instinct and feel. And according to the Ghost Squadron, that kind of flying was disappearing. "We've got pilots who can navigate using 6 screens," said Agent Calloway, the civilian in the room with a defense intelligence badge and a poker face. "But when those screens go black, they panic." He tapped the table. "We don't need more pilots. We need flyers. And apparently Ghosthawk here might be the last one who figured it out alone." That's when the pitch came. They wanted me to consult, off the record, on a new training initiative for extreme loss scenarios. Pilots would be dropped into simulations where every aid, every tool, every shortcut was stripped. No GPS, no terrain map, no HUD, just raw flying. You'll write the simulations, run them, maybe fly a few. But more than that, Pinto leaned in, eyes serious now. "You'll teach." I stared at him. "I don't even have a license," I said flatly. "I never made it into flight school." "We know," said Calloway. "But I flew in sim. You survived in sim. Pinto interrupted. And so did I, because of you. You know how many instructors we have that can build what you built from nothing? 0. My throat felt dry. Why now? He shrugged. Because the digital world is failing faster than the analog knowledge can keep up. We're losing a generation of flyers to automation. The Navy's already had 2 near misses. Someone up top said, find the ones who still think like it's 1975 but fly like it's 2075. Apparently, that was me. They gave me a week to decide. I didn't need a week. The next morning, I stood at the edge of Goldwater Field before the sun rose. The hangar bay was quiet, just a few sparrows flitting between the rafters and the whine of a cooling system kicking in somewhere behind me. I stared at the line of jets parked like sentinels in the orange dawn. I thought about all the times I'd walked by them with my head down. All the times someone said, Cortez, can you grab a wrench? Instead of, Cortez, you're flying today. Not anymore. That same day, I moved into the Ghost Squadron's off-grid flight facility, officially called Sierra Theta Range, unofficially dubbed the last classroom by those who trained there. My first task? Rebuild the Ghosthawk sequence into a full simulation tree. 3 variants. No guidance systems. Adverse weather presets. Each scenario designed to push a pilot past their flight manual and into their gut. The first group of test pilots called it flying blind. By the second week, they were calling it flying like Cortez. One night, after a particularly rough session where 2 instructors bailed out of the sim in frustration, I was in the control room reviewing logs when Pinto walked in with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed me one and said, you know the funny part? What? You're not even flying yet. Not officially. And they're already calling you a legend. I scoffed. Legends don't scrub oil pans or live in windowless trailers. Neither did Chuck Yeager when he started. I looked up. You think I should get certified? He smiled. I think you should stop waiting for permission. That stuck with me. 2 days later, I filed my application for private certification with the FAA. 3 weeks after that, I passed the written. And 1 month after that, I climbed into the cockpit of a real T-38 Talon under the watch of Lieutenant Commander Grace Viteri, a Marine pilot who'd flown in places we don't even put on maps. When we landed, she pulled off her helmet, turned to me, and said, I've been teaching flight for 12 years. Never seen hands like yours. That night, in my trailer, I opened my old Ghosthawk account and typed. First sim was survival. Second sim was hope. Third sim might just be the beginning. EC. You never forget your first emergency call. It came in at 1,427 hours, 3 days after I finished my solo check flight. The Ghost Squadron was mid-session with a fresh class of pilots. Lieutenant Moreno, Captain Chong, and 2 hotshots from the Coast Guard with more guts than experience. They were sweating their way through the deadstick inferno sim I designed, which modeled a dual-engine failure over the Pacific under nightfall. The idea was to force them into pure glider logic using terrain shadows and water reflections. It was brutal. Then the alert came through. A real F-18 from the 161st had gone silent south of the Tejano-Awadam Reservation. No transponder, no IFF ping, no SAT-link. Just one Mayday burst intercepted by a weather drone orbiting 30 miles out. Mayday, avionics blackout, unstable controls, partial comms, altitude falling, request. Any Ghosthawk listening? That last part? It cracked open my spine like a lightning strike. They weren't calling for help. They were calling for me. Colonel Jacoby was already barking orders by the time I reached the ops room. Scramble recon from Site Echo. Lock down the sector. No local air traffic. Who's on deck? Calloway asked, already punching keys. Pinto looked at me. Elena is. There was a beat of silence. No debate. No second guessing. I was airborne in 10 minutes. No ceremony. No press release. Just a woman in a black flight suit climbing into a 2-seater Talon with a test rig bolted to the co-pilot dash. My SIM code loaded into an auxiliary NAV system they still weren't sure would work outside the lab. They'd given me a call sign now. Not Ghosthawk. Torchlight. Because, as Pinto put it, when everything else goes dark, she finds the way. The second I was airborne, the silence hit me. Dead radio. No GPS lock. Not even basic airspeed telemetry. Every system flickered like it was under magnetic siege. This wasn't just a blackout. It was a pulse. An invisible hammer had gone off over the desert. and whoever was flying that Hornet had just flown straight into the eye of it. But I trained for this, because I designed this. Years ago, after watching my sim crash during a lightning storm, I'd built a protocol for exactly this kind of failure. Terrain-based bearings, time-based altimeter estimation, wind curve drift calculations tied to sunrise angles. All I needed was a starting point. I dropped to Angels 12 and circled the reservation's northeast corner. I knew the land, cliffs like frozen lava, dry riverbeds cut sharp through the dust. I found the weather drone's last ping and began a spiraling pattern. 2 minutes in, I spotted it. Smoke. Thin, pale, drifting northeast. I throttled into a descent and switched to visual nav. Then I saw her. The Hornet was limping, nose high, starboard wing dipped, trailing sparks like a dying comet. She was flying slow and low, maybe 200 knots, banking hard against uneven thrust. The pilot was manually fighting torque. Her rudder fluttered like a ribbon in a storm. I keyed the shortwave mic. This is Torchlight to Hornet 1. If you can hear me, click your lights twice. Nothing. Then, flick flick. She was still flying. I rolled up alongside, just above her left flank. Through the canopy, I could see the pilot, helmeted, tense, glancing at me. No HUD. No display. She was flying by feel. I held up 3 fingers. She responded with a nod. I signaled the plan, nose pitch to -1 degree, thrust bleed on 2-second delay, followed by an improvised canyon glide down Blue Ridge Gap. She blinked twice. Understood. It was time. The Hornet dropped into the valley like a wounded hawk. I followed, calling each maneuver aloud. Not for her, but for me. For the sky, the wind, the machine. Angle -1. Drop power. Let the wind grip the skin. Feel the terrain. Read the shadows. Don't fly the map, fly the earth. We twisted through the ridges, each turn scraping physics, every second feeling like a coin tossed against gravity. Her port wing clipped a mesquite branch once, but she held. I could feel the aircraft start to stabilize, the controls settling as the ridge curved outward. Then, runway lights. A dusty strip carved into the training field outside Ghost Squadron HQ. They'd cleared it. I'd radioed the base blind with a laser flash code from my auxiliary. They got the message. I broke left. She went straight. Touchdown. Hard. Sparks. But wheels down. The Hornet skidded to a stop with a growl of tired hydraulics and a geyser of sand. And then, silence. Back at the base, I watched them pull the canopy open. The pilot climbed out slowly, helmet off. Lieutenant Casey Tran, 26. First solo op on a full weapons training flight. Her eyes locked with mine across the tarmac. "Your Torchlight," she said, voice hoarse. I nodded. "I thought you were just a rumor." I grinned. "Guess I fly better than I brand." She saluted. I returned it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hangar where it had all started, alone, wrapped in the faint smell of scorched rubber and jet fuel, staring up at the stars beyond the open bay doors. Pinto found me there. He tossed me a bottle of electrolyte water, sat beside me on the floor. "You know what they're saying?" he asked. "Let me guess. That I'm reckless. Unlicensed. Unorthodox." "No," he said, smiling. "They're saying you're the future." 2 days after the rescue, I was called into the briefing room at 0700 sharp. I expected another debrief, maybe a quiet handshake from someone in command, nothing fancy. But when I opened the door, half the room was already filled. Not just brass either. Civilians in tailored suits. Intelligence types. One guy in the back looked like he'd stepped off a defense contractor brochure. Thin glasses, leather case, hair parted like he ironed it. At the head of the room stood Colonel Jacoby, arms folded like a mountain range. Behind him, a screen flickered with a paused frame. Me, midair, flying formation beside Lieutenant Transfailing Hornet. "Miss Cortez," Jacoby said, motioning me forward. "Congratulations. You just rewrote doctrine." A murmur rippled across the table. "Effective immediately," he continued. "You are being fast-tracked under Article 19E Emergency Field Commission to flight instructor level within the Ghost program. You'll be leading tactical training in blackout protocols, terrain memory approach, and unconventional aerial recovery." My mind was reeling. Wait, I'm not even military. Jacoby gave me a tight smile. "We're aware. Which is why we're also issuing you temporary civilian exempt clearance to operate under Section Echo Romeo. You'll have the authority to fly, instruct, and deploy if needed. And if I say no?" He leaned forward. Then the next time someone's falling out of the sky, they fall alone. That shut me up. Across the table, one of the contractors whispered something to his colleague, then said aloud, "We've reviewed the Cortez maneuver tree." "Who trained you, exactly?" "No one," I said. "Self-taught. Unless you count 12 years under a wing and 5,000 hours flying with no safety net." There was a pause. Then another voice, quiet, older, cut through the room. The man in the corner. "I recognize that kind of learning," he said. "That's foundational instinct. We used to build whole programs around people like her." Jacoby nodded toward him. "That's Brigadier General Trent. He built the original Ghost Squadron." I looked over, stunned. Trent stood slowly, walked over to me, and extended his hand. "I read your terrain sim logs and your blind descent protocols. You're not just building maneuvers, Miss Cortez. You're restoring a lost language." He paused. "You ready to teach others how to speak it?" I shook his hand. "Yes, sir." The ceremony came that afternoon. It wasn't a medal ceremony, not even a ribbon pinning, just a silent flight line, a battered runway, a single box on a stool near my Talon's left wheel. Inside, a patch, black field, white wings, the new Ghost Squadron sigil, torchlight. They didn't make a speech. No cameras, just Pinto, Jacoby, and a handful of the instructors standing off to the side. I picked up the patch and held it for a second, not to admire it, to remember it, because I knew what came next. With recognition came risk. By the end of the week, I was in charge of training 6 pilots, some seasoned, some raw, all of them younger than me, and none of them ready for what I was going to throw at them. I started with the basics. Kill the HUD. Shut off the GPS fly by shadow and grit. Out there, I told them, the sky doesn't care about your rank or your software. It only respects your decisions and your mistakes. They hated me by day 3. By day 7, they were asking for extra flight hours. But while things were rising in the air, they were getting darker on the ground. Calloway pulled me into a side briefing after evening drills. "You're trending," he said, tapping a secure tablet. "The footage from Trans Rescue? It leaked. People are calling you the analog angel." I groaned. "Please tell me that's not a headline." "It's worse," he said. "Congressional committee wants to meet you. Contractors are sniffing around for tactical consultation opportunities. We've already had 4 academies request your training modules." I stared at him. "And the bad news?" His tone shifted. "Not everyone likes what you represent. You're proof that the system missed someone, that the protocols failed. There are people, loud people, asking, if she's this good, why was she never in uniform?" I clenched my jaw. "Because I wasn't invited." He nodded. "That's not a comfortable answer for some." That night, I sat alone in the hangar again. Only this time, I wasn't looking at the stars. I was staring at my patch. Torchlight. It wasn't a name anymore. It was a responsibility. A symbol the pilots who didn't know if they had what it took, until I told them they did. I thought of my younger self, Elena at 19, wiping jet grease off her face while watching fighters take off without her. What would she say now? She'd probably smile. Then she'd say, "It's about damn time. Success paints a target." And I was glowing neon. A week after I pinned on my Ghost Squadron patch, the cracks started showing. Not in the sky. On the ground. First, it was a transfer request from one of my students, Lieutenant Folsom, a sharp flyer with a by-the-book brain and a chip on his shoulder big enough to block comms. He balked at my blind descent drills, said they weren't academically validated. "You know," he said after one session, "we have procedures for a reason. Flying by instinct? That's what gets people killed." I didn't blink. And relying on failing sensors is what already gets people killed. Ask Lieutenant Tran. Folsom didn't last long. 2 days later, he requested reassignment back to Nellis. Then came the audit. A quiet visit from a Department of Defense oversight team, 3 suits, 2 clipboards, and one silent woman who never introduced herself but asked questions that cut right to the bone. "Where did you receive your flight certification? Who authorized your maneuver development? Was Ghost Squadron aware you had no formal training when they placed you on staff?" I answered them all, calm and direct. But the real answers weren't what they were looking for. They wanted paperwork. They wanted tradition. They wanted boxes ticked. The next blow hit harder. Colonel Jacoby called me into his office late on a Tuesday. The lights were low. The air conditioning rattled like it was holding its breath. "There's been a complaint," he said. My stomach sank. "From who?" He didn't answer. Just slid a file across the desk. Inside were printed transcripts from anonymous sources, quotes from instructors, field officers, even a pilot I'd never trained. Cortez's methods are dangerous. She undermines standard training. We're glorifying recklessness, not discipline. I looked up. You believe this? Jacoby shook his head. Doesn't matter. Command's asking questions. Big ones. About your place here. About Ghost Squadron's future. I leaned forward. Are they shutting us down? Not yet, he said. But they've suspended all live flight drills under your protocols. They want you to submit every maneuver for approval. Line by line. Diagram by diagram. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. They're grounding Torchlight, I said bitterly. He didn't deny it. That night, I walked the hangar floor like it was a funeral. The Talons sat silent. My students, what was left of them, had been reassigned to desk sims until further notice. Only one person stayed behind after the lights dimmed. Lieutenant Casey Tran. She was crouched beside her Hornet, hands tracing the scorch marks still visible on the tail. She stood when I approached. They don't like people who rewrite the rules, she said without turning. I didn't rewrite them, I replied. I flew without needing them. She looked at me, face lit by the edge of an inspection lamp. I put in a letter, she said. To command. Testimony. I told them what you did for me. What you taught me. What it meant. I smiled. It won't be enough. Maybe not, she said. But it'll be louder than silence. The next morning, I found something taped to the side of my sim rig. A note. No name. Just 4 words. They can't ground instinct. There was a USB stick, too. Inside it? Flight data logs. Classified simulations from the Air Force Academy. All based on protocols that matched my original Ghosthawk maneuver. Word for word. Someone had taken my designs, rebranded them, filed them under emerging tactics. They'd stripped my name from the code, but not the signature. I recognized the command lines, the structure, the flight logic. It was mine. They wanted the work. They just didn't want me. I took it to Jacoby. He stared at the data for a long time, then said, they've been running this in stealth sims for 2 months. No credit. No citation. They used me as a ghost, I said. Again. He nodded. But now you've got proof. I sat down, heart pounding. What do we do? Jacoby folded his arms. We fight. Not with anger. With clarity. We build something so good, so undeniably necessary, they can't bury it. Not without looking like fools. He paused. Tell me, Cortez, you still want to fly? I stood. No, I said. I want to teach the world how. Later that week, I sent a message from the Ghosthawk account. The first public one in years. To every pilot who's ever felt overlooked. To every mechanic who memorized the engine before they ever touched the throttle. To every instructor who teaches beyond the manual. Ghost Squadron's not gone. It's just warming up. That post exploded. Viral among aviators. Threads full of people sharing stories, near misses, broken systems, moments where instinct saved lives when protocol couldn't. They didn't know me, but they believed me. I didn't go to war with the system. I outlew it. The leaked sim data lit a fire across every airbase that had ever felt forgotten. My inbox filled overnight, pilots, instructors, even civilian engineers from Boeing and Lockheed. All of them had the same message. We've seen your work. We believe in it. How can we help? So I started building something. Not a squadron. Not a program. A movement. We called it Flight Line Zero. An open-source training platform. Fully modular. Field-tested protocols designed for worst-case scenarios. No gates. No rank required. Just raw flightcraft, shaped by people who lived through the fire and the silence afterward. I opened with the Ghosthawk series. Then Shadow Drift. Then Black Glass Navigation, for when all you have is moonlight and memory. Within a month, the videos were being used in unofficial night drills at 6 air bases. 2 squadrons updated their own emergency manuals to include Cortez variants. Command took notice, but it was already too late. They summoned me to a formal review in D.C. I knew what it was, a chess match in dress blues. They'd try to absorb what I'd made without giving me credit. Maybe offer me a quiet job. A low desk. A leash. I wore my patch instead of a suit. Inside the meeting room, I found General Trent waiting. You made them nervous, he said, grinning. I made them watch, I corrected. He motioned to the empty table. You ready to stake your name? I nodded. Not just mine. After the meeting, I stood on the rooftop of the Pentagon's West Annex, watching jets pass overhead. A younger pilot walked up, uniform crisp, eyes wide. You're Torchlight, he said. No, I said. I'm Elena. Torchlight belongs to everyone who ever got told they'd never fly and flew anyway. He saluted. I returned it, then turned to the sky. It happened during a routine test flight. Well, it started that way. We were flying over the Sierra Nevada, running blind terrain drills with two newly commissioned Ghost pilots. I was in lead. They followed in a stacked V. At 22,000 feet, everything felt perfect. Then the storm hit. Fast. Violent. Off-grid. A rogue system off the Pacific had pivoted inland. The radios cracked, GPS dropped, and the backup transponders went quiet like someone had pulled the plug on the sky itself. I heard one voice through the noise. Torchlight, this is Ghost 3. I've lost my horizon. I don't know where I am at. I felt it in my chest. Not fear focus. Follow my vector, I called out. Don't chase the instruments. Trust the pressure, not the panel. No answer. Just static. I broke formation and dropped. The clouds swallowed me whole, thick and slick like diving through cold oil. I couldn't see the wingtip, couldn't hear anything but wind and my own heartbeat. So I flew like I always had, by memory. There was a narrow pass below. I knew it from 100 sim runs. I banked hard, dropped throttle, and let the wind guide me between the granite teeth. Seconds later, a shadow zipped past, Ghost 3, flailing too steep. I throttled in and got beside her, nose to nose. She was panicking. Eyes wide. Hands trembling. I gave her a signal. Old school. Finger tap over the heart. Trust the air. She nodded. We descended together, slicing below the storm line and into open sky. We landed 40 minutes later on a dirt strip outside Bishop. No tower. No lights. Just two jets, breathing in the silence. Back at base, command wanted a report. I gave them one. No system can replace what instinct earns. Train for failure. Teach the human, not just the machine. They didn't argue this time. They just listened. They offered me a promotion. Full rank. Naval Reserve. Permanent slot on the training command. I said no. I didn't need the brass to validate the flight. Instead, I spent my last day at Ghost Squadron the way I'd spent my first, walking the flight line just after dawn, boots scuffing dust, listening to the hum of a sky that had never stopped calling me. Lieutenant Trink caught up with me near the hangar. They're naming the new sim rig after you, she said. Torchlight 1. I winced. Feels weird. She smiled. It should. That's how you know you didn't build it for fame. A few weeks later, I stepped back. Not because I was tired, because I was finished. Flight Line 0 had grown beyond me. Pilots I'd never met were teaching maneuvers I wrote in a trailer, under a busted ceiling fan, on a rig I built with borrowed money. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a spark. And sparks don't stay. They light the match and move on. I moved north, settled in a small town outside Spokane. No flight path overhead. Just trees. Quiet. But every once in a while, I'd hear a jet scream past at high altitude, far above the treetops. And I'd smile. Not out of longing. Out of knowing. One day, a letter arrived. No return address. Just an Air Force seal and 3 words. You lit the way. Inside, a photo. A new pilot class. 22 of them. Diverse. Raw. Eyes filled with fire. On the wall behind them, a plaque. Legacy-grade flight craft. Founded on the doctrine of Cortez. I stared at that for a long time. Then I opened my old rig again, dusted it off, fired it up, logged into Ghosthawk. I posted one last message. You don't need permission. Just a place to start. Build it. Fly it. Teach it. The sky will meet you where you are. Torchlight out. That's the story. Of the girl they said would never fly. Who didn't just take off, she built her own runway. And now? That runway's yours. So go on.